There is a side of elite sports that most people never truly witness. Cameras show the routines, the medals, the applause, and the bright lights, but they rarely show the silence that follows. The exhaustion after the performance, the pressure, or the fear athletes carry when the one thing that shaped their life begins to slip away. For Ekaterina Alexandrovskaya, figure skating was never just a sport. It was her identity, her purpose, her escape, and the center of everything she had built her life around. For years, she pursued the Olympic dream with extraordinary determination. As a teenager, she became a world champion, represented Australia at the Winter Olympics, and seemed to be stepping into a future full of promise. But behind the performances was a young woman carrying pressures that very few people could truly understand. And in July 2020, at only 20 years old, Ekaterina Alexandrovskaya's life came to a tragic end. This is the story of a skater whose rise inspired many and whose loss deeply shocked the figure skating world. Ekaterina Alexandrovskaya was born on January 1, 2000, in Moscow, Russia. From a very young age, skating became a defining part of her life. In Russia, figure skating is not treated like a casual hobby. It exists in one of the most demanding and competitive sporting cultures in the world. Children begin training early, often sacrificing an ordinary childhood in pursuit of elite success, and the pressure to stand out is intense from the very beginning. The environment is unforgiving. Expectations are high, competition is constant, and only a small number of athletes are able to rise to the top. Others fade quietly despite years of sacrifice. Ekaterina stood out early because she was disciplined, determined, and willing to endure the difficult training required to succeed in pair skating. But although she was born and trained in Russia, her path would eventually take an unexpected turn, one that would lead her to represent Australia instead. That new chapter began in 2015, when Ekaterina was paired with Australian skater Harley Windsor. It was an unusual partnership from the start. They came from different countries, different cultures, and different skating backgrounds. Yet in pair skating, unexpected combinations can sometimes create something special, and coaches quickly recognized the potential between them. Harley brought athletic power and determination, while Ekaterina brought technical reliability, precision, and a fierce competitive focus. Together they improved rapidly. What made them stand out was not just their skill, but the way they moved as one unit. Their timing grew smoother, their trust deepened, and their connection on the ice became more natural with every season. As their performances improved, so did their results. In 2017, Ekaterina Alexandrovskaya and Harley Windsor achieved something historic. They won the World Junior Figure Skating Championships, making headlines not only because of the gold medal itself, but because they became the first Australians ever to win a world title in figure skating. For Australian skating, it was a groundbreaking moment, proof that the country could produce champions on the world stage. Australia had never been viewed as a major force in figure skating, and suddenly this young pair team had changed the conversation. Ekaterina and Harley became symbols of what was possible. Their victory drew international attention, increased media coverage, and raised expectations around what they might achieve next. But with that success came greater pressure, and for Ekaterina, the weight of those expectations only grew heavier. To the audience, figure skating often looks elegant, beautiful, and effortless. But behind every polished performance is an environment built on pressure, repetition, and risk. Athletes spend hours training every day. Falls are common, injuries are part of the sport, and every mistake is reviewed again and again. Pair skating is especially dangerous because it includes throw jumps, lifts, twists, and high-speed elements that require total trust between two people. One small error can lead to a serious injury. Skaters are expected to perform through pain, to keep training while exhausted, and to appear calm no matter how they feel internally. For young athletes, especially those whose lives revolve entirely around competition, that pressure can become overwhelming. The glamour seen by the public often hides the physical and emotional toll demanded by the sport. In 2018, Ekaterina and Harley qualified for the Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang. For many athletes, reaching the Olympics is the culmination of a lifetime of work. And for Ekaterina, it represented a dream she had been chasing since childhood. The Olympics changed everything. They were no longer simply promising skaters with potential. They were Olympians, representing Australia on the biggest stage in winter sport. Olympic competition brings a level of pressure that is difficult to describe. Millions are watching. National expectations are high and years of preparation are reduced to a few minutes on the ice. Ekaterina competed under that pressure, while still barely out of her teenage years. The Olympics brought recognition and opportunity, but they also brought enormous emotional strain and physical demand, the kind that can linger long after the event itself is over. One of the most difficult parts of elite sport is what happens after major success. Achieving a dream does not make the pressure disappear. It often makes it worse. Athletes can become trapped between the fear of failing and the expectation to keep proving themselves over and over again. For Ekaterina, the years after the Olympics appear to have become increasingly difficult, both physically and emotionally. According to reports, she was later diagnosed with epilepsy, a condition that could directly affect the balance, coordination and control that figure skating depends on. For any skater, that diagnosis would be devastating. For someone whose entire identity was tied so closely to the sport, the impact was likely even more painful. It introduced uncertainty into the one area of life where she had once seemed strongest. Around the same period, her partnership with Harley Windsor came to an end. In figure skating, partnerships are not simple professional arrangements. Athletes spend years training together, traveling together, competing together, and building the kind of trust that allows them to perform dangerous elements at high speed. When a partnership ends, the emotional impact can be significant, especially when it happens during an already unstable period in life. For Ekaterina, the separation marked another painful turning point. At the same time, her future in competition became increasingly uncertain. Injuries, health struggles, and career instability were all arriving at once. For many athletes, retirement is hard even when it happens on their own terms. But when the sport begins to slip away unexpectedly, it can feel like losing not just a career, but an entire sense of self. One of the least discussed realities in elite sport is how isolating retirement can be, especially when it happens at a young age. Most elite skaters spend nearly their entire childhood working toward one goal. Training schedules shape every day. Friendships often revolve around competition, and self-worth becomes deeply connected to performance. Then suddenly that structure disappears. The attention fades, the routine is gone, and the athlete is left trying to understand who they are without the sport. For some people, that transition is manageable. For others, it becomes emotionally devastating. In July 2020, tragedy struck. Ekaterina Alexandrovskaya died in Moscow at the age of 20 after falling from a sixth-floor window. Authorities later ruled her death a suicide. The news sent shockwaves through the skating world. Only a few years earlier, she had stood on top podiums as a world junior champion and Olympian. Now the community was mourning a life that ended far too soon. Tributes poured in from skaters, coaches, and fans across the world. Many remembered not only her talent, but her determination, discipline, and the quiet intensity she brought to competition. Her death also forced difficult conversations inside the sports world. Conversations about mental health, pressure, burnout, and the emotional cost of elite competition. For years, many athletes had spoken privately about anxiety, depression, identity loss, and the pain that can follow retirement. But those conversations were often pushed aside. Stories like Ekaterina's changed that, because they revealed the human reality behind athletic success. Audiences see medals, routines, and results. What they often do not see is the emotional burden athletes may be carrying behind the scenes. Her story became part of a much larger conversation about how elite sport can demand perfection while leaving little room for vulnerability, struggle, or recovery. And yet one of the saddest things that can happen after a tragedy is for a person to become defined only by the way their life ended. Ekaterina Alexandrovskaya's life was bigger than its final chapter. She was a champion, a teammate, and a young woman who dedicated years of her life to mastering one of the hardest sports in the world. She helped create a historic moment for Australian figure skating and inspired young athletes who saw something of themselves in her journey.